Media, key stakeholders of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, colleagues, good morning. Welcome to the PIOJ's quarterly press briefing. Today, the Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, will be presenting on two broad areas. He will first provide a preliminary overview of economic performance for the April to June 2023 quarter, and then he will provide an update on the latest available data for poverty, followed by the short-term economic outlook for the economy. For today's press briefing, the DG is being supported by Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director for the Economic Planning and Research Division, and Mrs. Suzette Johnson, Director of Policy Research. As Gwyneth indicated, we will be taking questions once Dr. Henry has concluded his presentation. DG, over to you. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Vine. Good morning, everyone. Before I provide details on economic performance, let me remind you of the purpose of these quarterly economic estimates provided by the PIOJ. The PIOJ presents preliminary estimates on economic performance for each quarter, and this is based on early information provided by major data providers. The provision of preliminary estimates is consistent with trends in modern economies globally, where it is a common practice to release a first, second, and even a third preliminary estimate before the final figures are provided. The PIOJ releases the preliminary growth estimate approximately 6 weeks following the end of the quarter being reviewed, while Statin releases the official figures at the end of the third month following the end of the quarter. Various stakeholders, including our international development partners, the private sector, as well as the government, use the preliminary data to inform critical planning and policy-related decisions. Today, we are reporting that the Jamaican economy grew by an estimated 1.5% during the April to June 2023 quarter, compared with the corresponding quarter of 2022. The outturn for the review quarter largely reflected increased capacity utilization in the mining and quarrying industry, the continuation of the growth momentum in tourism-related industries, increased demand spurred by higher levels of employment, as well as increased business and consumer confidence relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022. Further growth was stymied by the impact of drought conditions on agriculture and water production, as well as relatively aged equipment in some industries, which resulted in unplanned downtimes. Real sector developments in the goods producing industry. The goods producing industry grew by an estimated 1%, with improved performance recorded for the mining and quarrying industry, which was sufficient to outweigh contractions recorded for the manufacturing, agriculture, and construction industries. Agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Real value added for the agriculture industry contracted by 7.1%. This outturn primarily reflected the adverse impact of drought conditions, which resulted in a 7.7% decline in the area of crops reaped and a reduction in crop yield for most crop groups. The performance of the industry was due to an 11.8% decline in the output of other agricultural crops. Lower production was recorded in 7 of the 9 crop groups, including potatoes, down 28%, yam, down 15%, vegetables, down 14.6%, cereals, down 13.2%, and legumes, down 8.7%. Additionally, traditional export crops declined by 0.8%, largely reflecting lower production of sugarcane, down 22.6%, banana, down 0.2%, and cocoa, down 56.4%. These decreases outweighed an estimated 60.5% increase in coffee production. Animal farming was estimated to have grown by 1.8%, attributed to increased broiler meat and egg production. Mining and quarrying. Real value added for the mining and quarrying industry increased by 163.1% due to an expansion in alumina production, which outweighed a decrease in crude bauxite production. Total bauxite production increased by 69%, reflecting the combined effect of alumina production up 271.8% due to the reopening of the Jamaica refinery. The alumina capacity utilization rate was 36.3%, up 26.6 percentage points compared with the corresponding quarter of 2022, and crude bauxite production down 6.8%. The bauxite capacity utilization rate decreased by 3.4 percentage points to 47.1%. Manufacturing. Real value added for the manufacturing industry was estimated to have contracted by 0.6%. Lower output was estimated for the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry, while the other manufacturing sub-industry was estimated to have remained flat. Within the food, beverages, and tobacco sub-industry, lower production was recorded for animal feeds, down 0.7%, sugar, down 19.5%, dairy products, down 13.5%, bakery products, down 1.2%, and rum and alcohol, down 25.9%. For the other manufacturing sub-industry, higher output was recorded within the chemicals and chemicals products component, with fertilizer up 31.1%, paint up 57.9%, and aluminum sulfate up 9.4%. Non-metallic minerals is also estimated to have increased, supported by cement production up 2.6%. In contrast, the petroleum products component was estimated to have contracted due to lower production of heavy fuel oil, down 14%, automotive diesel oil, down 10.2%, and gasoline, down 4.6%. The lower output of petroleum products resulted from reduced operating days at the Petrojam refinery due to its closure for 33 days to facilitate maintenance activities. This compared with closure of 31 days in the corresponding quarter of 2022. Construction. Real value added for the construction industry decreased by 3.3%, mainly reflecting a downturn in activities in the other construction and building construction components. The decline in the other construction component was due to reduced capital expenditure on civil engineering activities, reflecting National Works Agency, NWA, down 52.5% to $2.4 billion, reflecting lower expenditure on the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project, SCHIP, and Port Authority of Jamaica, which disbursed $137.3 million, down 89.2%, due to reduced expenditure on infrastructural developments. The building construction component is estimated to have contracted, reflecting a decline in housing starts by the NHT of 21%. Preliminary data on sales of construction inputs indicated an 8% decline in real terms. Developments in the services industry. The services industry was estimated to have grown by 1.8%, reflecting higher real value added for all industries, with the exception of wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, which declined, and producers of government services, which remained flat. Electricity and water supply. The electricity and water supply industry recorded growth of 6.2% in real value added, reflecting an expansion in electricity consumption. This increase was sufficient to mitigate the contraction recorded for water consumption. Electricity consumption increased by 7.9%, reflecting higher sales for 5 of 6 categories. Residential, up 4.3%. General service, that's small businesses using less than 25 kilovolt ampere kVA, was up 6.4%. Power service, that's large businesses using more than 25 kVA, but less than 500 kVA, was up 4.6%. Large power, that's businesses using more than 500 kVA, was up 6.6%. And largest power, that's single locations with a minimum peak demand of 2,000 kVA was up 35.2%. These increases outweighed an estimated decline for street lighting plus traffic signals, which was down 4.6%. 13 of the 14 parishes recorded higher sales, led by a 56.7% increase in Clarendon, reflecting the resumption of operations at the Jamalco plant. Electricity sales in Kingston and St. Andrew grew by 4% and continued to account for the largest share at 34.2%. Increases were also recorded for Trelawney, up 3.6%, St. Anne, up 6.9%, Westmoreland, up 9.6%, and St. James, up 4.8%, which benefited from higher tourist arrivals. Water consumption declined by 0.3%, reflecting declines in 6 of the 14 parishes. There was a 2.6% decrease in the Eastern Division, which accounted for 65.1% of total consumption. This outweighed an increase of 4.3% in the Western Division. Transport, storage, and communication. Real value added for the transport, storage, and communication industry grew by an estimated 5.2% due to increases in both the transport and storage and communication components. Improved performance was recorded for the air transport subcomponent, largely reflecting a 39.8% increase in passenger movements due to departures, up 41.3%, and arrivals, up 39.1%. Air cargo movements also increased, up 104.3%. The maritime transport subcomponent was estimated to have grown due to a 9.3% increase in total cargo volume. This outturn was supported by an 18.6% increase in maritime cargo movements at outports, driven by increased exports of alumina. Cargo movements at the Port of Kingston declined by 0.3%. Finance and insurance services. Real value added for the finance and insurance services industry was estimated to have grown by 1% during the review quarter. The performance reflected the impact of increases in the net interest income on the stock of loans and advances at deposit-taking institutions and higher fees and commission income, supported by increased utilization of financial services. WR trim. Real value added in the wholesale and retail trade, repair and installation of machinery, WR trim industry, is estimated to have contracted by 3.3%, reflecting the impact of estimated declines in associated industries such as agriculture, as less produce was available for distribution, as well as construction, due to weakened demand for construction inputs. Lower sales were recorded for 5 of the 8 categories, including minerals, fuels, and lubricants, down 13.2%, other wholesale and retail sales of goods and services, down 1%, and hardware, building supplies, electrical goods and machinery, down 7.7%. Hotels and restaurants. Real value added for the hotels and restaurants industry grew by an estimated 9%, reflecting an increase in visitors based on preliminary arrival data. Preliminary estimates on foreign national arrivals for the review quarter stood at 705,031 visitors, an increase of 14.2% compared with data for the corresponding quarter of 2022. Total visitor expenditure for April 2023 increased to US $368.77 million, up by 19.7% compared with the corresponding quarter of 2022. Regarding the employment outturn, Statin has provided an update on the labor force survey for April 2023. As such, we will not present a detailed report on this area. The highlights, however, are that for the month of April 2023, the unemployment rate was 4.5%. This was 1.5 percentage points lower than the rate recorded in April 2022 and represents the lowest unemployment rate on record. The youth unemployment rate also fell to 12.2% compared with 15.5% in April 2022. The unemployed labor force declined by 19,700 persons to 61,300. The employed labor force increased by 43,300 persons to 1,312,600 persons relative to April 2022. This is the highest level of employment on record. This outturn also officially confirms that the Jamaican labor force has fully recovered from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, surpassing the pre-COVID-19 high by 39,900 persons. Recall, no labor force surveys were undertaken for October 2022 and January 2023 due to competing census-related activities. Of note, since a sharp downturn in employment recorded in the height of the pandemic, specifically between January and July of 2020, when 151,100 fewer persons were employed, the country has since gained an additional 191,000 employed persons. With respect to the employed labor force by industry group, 10 of the 15 industry groups recorded higher employment levels. Among these were real estate, renting, and other business services, up 15,300, wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, up 13,100, and accommodation and food service activities, up 7,500 persons. Looking now at GDP performance for January to June of 2023. For the first 6 months of 2023, real GDP is estimated to have grown by 2.9%. The services industry grew by 3.5%, while the goods producing industry grew by 1%. The industries which were estimated to have recorded the largest increases during the first half of the year were mining and quarrying, up 137.7%, hotels and restaurants, up 18.5%, other services, up 11.4%, and transport, storage, and communication, up 6.1%. Turning now to an update on the 2021 poverty rate, starting with how Jamaica calculates poverty. In Jamaica, consumption expenditure data, rather than income, is used to measure poverty due to the availability and relative accuracy of the data. The rates are first calculated from household data at the regional level, then aggregated nationally. The rates for 2021 will be compared with 2019, as no local estimate of poverty was available for 2020. The Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, JSLC, was not fielded in 2020 due to COVID-19 pandemic conditions. The 2021 poverty prevalence. The data to inform the 2021 poverty rate were collected over a 5-month period from June to October 2021, a little over 1 year since the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Jamaica. The prevalence of poverty in 2021 was estimated at 16.7%, reflecting an increase of 5.7 percentage points relative to 2019. The overall increase in the poverty rate was driven by increases in 2 regions, as the rate in one region was statistically the same. Rural areas registered the highest rate at 22.1%, followed by other urban centers at 15.5%, and the Greater Kingston metropolitan area at 10.4%. Relative to 2019, the prevalence of poverty increased in the Greater Kingston metropolitan area by 5.7 percentage points, and rural areas by 7.9 percentage points, but remained relatively unchanged in other urban centers. In terms of context, the COVID-19 pandemic negatively affected the lives and livelihood of persons, leaving a legacy of rising poverty and widening inequality. Similar to most economies, Jamaica was still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic in 2021. The World Bank estimated that in 2021, about 97 million more people were living on less than US $1.90 per day because of the pandemic, increasing the global poverty rate from 7.8% to 9.1%. Additionally, 163 million more were living on less than US $5.50 per day. Globally, 3 to 4 years of progress towards ending extreme poverty are estimated to have been lost. While the Jamaican economy recorded growth of 4.6% in 2021, and employment increased by 8.3% in July 2021 relative to July 2020, real GDP was still 5.8% below its 2019 level, and employment was 3.3% below what it was in July 2019. These factors explain the higher poverty rate in 2021 relative to 2019. In summary, the poverty rate recorded in 2021 compared with 2019 reflected the adverse impact of the pandemic on household income and consumption, and is in keeping with global and regional expectations and experiences. This impact was tempered by positive movements in the macroeconomy, as well as social interventions by the government and the private sector. Going forward, the poverty rate is expected to fall, given the continued improvement in the economy, as reflected in the improvement in real GDP and employment. Note that the 2021 edition of the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, which tracks the effects of social and economic programs and policies, is being finalized and will be made available to the public following its tabling in Parliament later this year, likely by September 2023. Looking at the short-term economic outlook, July to September 2023 and fiscal year 2023-24. Short-term prospects for the overall economy are positive, based on 1, expected improved performances from the mining and quarrying, hotels and restaurants, other services, and the transport and storage industries. 2, anticipated strengthening in business confidence based on firms' perception that future business conditions will improve. This is expected to drive domestic demand. 3, continued recovery of the global economy, which augurs well for external demand. This is supported by recent projections from the International Monetary Fund, indicating a strengthening in global growth for 2023. This positive outlook, however, could be adversely impacted by adverse weather conditions, including drought and heavy rainfall, plant downtime due to relatively aged equipment in major industries, particularly in the manufacturing industry, and slower than expected growth in the economies of Jamaica's main trading partners. Against this background, for July to September 2023, growth in output is anticipated to be within the range of 1% to 2%. This projection is based on expected growth in most industries, led by the services sector, in particular mining and quarrying, hotels and restaurants, other services, and transport, storage, and communication. Early indicators are positive, as reflected in 1, hotels and restaurants, with an increase in preliminary airport arrivals up by 14.7% to 273,376 persons for the month of July 2023. 2, electricity and water supply, reflecting increases in both electricity and water consumption. Electricity consumption for the month of July 2023 increased by 10.6%. 3, mining and quarrying, reflecting the increased capacity utilization relative to the corresponding quarter of 2022, when the Jamaica refinery operated at reduced capacity as production gradually resumed following the 10-month closure. For the month of July 2023, alumina production increased by 321.2%, while crude bauxite production declined by 18%. For fiscal year 2023-24, current projections are that the country will record higher levels of output relative to the performance of fiscal year 2022-23. Consequently, the PIOJ's projection is for growth in output within the range of 1% to 2% for the fiscal year. This projection is based on the expectation that the recovery in industries such as mining and quarrying and the growth momentum for industries such as hotels and restaurants and other services will continue. Additionally, the current drag on growth from industries such as agriculture and construction is expected to dissipate as these industries return to positive performances by the end of the fiscal year. And so in closing, the preliminary data presented on performance for the April to June 2023 quarter indicate that the performance and outlook of the economy remains positive. Most industries have fully recovered and are now in a new growth phase. The challenge, however, is how to maintain robust rates of growth above the long-term average in order to realize the goals of Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan. The utilization of innovative strategies to manage the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic has facilitated the infusion of productivity-enhancing tools, processes, and products, which have become a permanent feature of some business processes going forward. These include the greater use of the work-from-home modality and virtual meetings and conferences, and a pivoting to the manufacture of more IT-based and higher value-added products and services, away from products for which demand has diminished. The most recent data on the prevalence of poverty for Jamaica indicate that the rate of poverty for 2021 deteriorated relative to the pre-COVID levels recorded in 2019. Given the conditions that prevailed at the time, which included lockdowns, job cuts, and reduced work hours, the outturn was consistent with expectations. No survey of living conditions was undertaken in 2022 because of competing activities regarding the census. However, it is anticipated that subsequent updates on the prevalence of poverty will show improvements consistent with the faster than expected economic recovery and record low unemployment rate and high employment levels. Against the background of relatively low unemployment rates, there are at least 2 assessments being undertaken that seek to identify skills gaps in meeting the demand for existing and new industries to build labor mobility and social resilience. The record low unemployment rate speaks well to Jamaica exiting the recovery phase and entering into a new growth phase. The extent to which this new growth phase will be high and inclusive will depend not only on the creation of new jobs, but higher paying jobs that are driven by improvements in labor productivity. Recently, employers have lamented the challenges in finding skilled workers to take advantage of existing as well as new job opportunities. It is therefore critical that persons upskill, that is, enhance existing abilities to improve output in their current role, as well as reskill, that is, prepare for new jobs to take advantage of existing and new opportunities. The recent removal of tuition and administrative fees for the HEART NSTA Trust programs up to level 4 is expected to play a significant role in improving the skill of the labor force and by extension, productivity and wages, which will assist in moving some persons out of poverty. It is also critical that employers partner with the government in identifying skills gaps on an ongoing basis to inform course development and resource allocation. Despite the challenges that abound, we remain optimistic as we continue to closely monitor and assess these developments. And so in closing, I want to acknowledge and thank the very dedicated team here at the PIOJ, as well as our various partners. I encourage us to continue our collaborative effort and to remain disciplined and responsible as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. May God continue to bless Jamaica land we love. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. We will now be taking your questions. You may indicate your interest by either raising your hands or placing a message in the chat. Do we have any questions? I'm taking it the presentation was clear. If there are, there's a question in the chat. Is the PIOJ concerned? Is the PIOJ concerned that the current labor force will be unable to sustain growth in the economy? And this is from Siobhan Campbell. DG, did you hear that question?
Is the PIOJ concerned
that the current labor force will be unable to sustain growth in the economy?
So from Siobhan, thank you, Siobhan. Thank you for the question. And so we watch the condition as we've projected continued growth going forward. There are efforts underway, and we've been a part of those efforts to ensure the sustained training and skilling of the labor force. We've had discussions. I think did we say it in our last press conference? I think that our discussions with partners in the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Labor to speak to the supply of labor going forward, to continue the sustained supply of labor in terms of ensuring the types of educational outcomes, the types of training and opportunities for improvements in skills. So it's something that we continue to watch. We think we have and seen in key areas, just like general a building of resilience, I think, in Jamaica, in terms of as we look at how labor is mobile, but how do we ensure the types of skills we see going forward? We've seen efforts in the business process outsourcing industry to upskill and to move persons into knowledge process outsourcing. And we've seen a number of jobs growing and being created in that space. We've seen efforts to train workers in the tourism industry and in those spaces. And so just broadly, these are ongoing efforts. We've been identifying, as we mentioned today, looking at efforts to identify, quantify the skills gaps and to see how we can address closing those gaps. So it's something that will require ongoing efforts and the types of monitoring, Siobhan and audience, that we have been seeing in recent times. So it's something we continue to watch. But so there's no, would you say, James, anything to add? It's something we're watching and working currently on.
And just probably to refer back to the two initiatives being conducted by GOJ, one by the Ministry of Tourism, examining skills gap in the tourist industry, and another by the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, which will undertake a comprehensive review of the labor demand conditions in Jamaica. And from these studies, we expect some policy recommendations as to how to address some of these labor shortage issues that are emerging.
Thanks, DG and James. The second question is from Delia Wright. Unemployment rates are improving, but poverty is increasing. Is there a reason for that?
So two different timelines. So James, let's speak about that.
All right. So recall the poverty rate which is provided is that for 2021. At that time, the economy was still experiencing the conditions of COVID. We were still having lockdowns, job cuts, etc. Since then, the labor force has recovered, and we have made a point that we expect that in subsequent releases of the JSLC, we do expect to see improvement in the poverty rate. But for 2021, the conditions which prevailed at the time is reflected in the poverty outturn presented.
We also made a point that it's quite in keeping with expectations and the experiences globally. So we've seen poverty rates increase globally. In many cases, way above what we've seen here. We've made the point that the types of efforts in terms of the speed of recovery for Jamaica and the types of efforts in terms of social protection efforts to offset based on, we've seen the CARE program, BEST program, so a number of creative programs to offset the fallout. were very instrumental, we believe, in ensuring that the poverty rates were not higher. And so we are seeing the improvements going forward as reflected in economic performance as well as labor market record performances.
Thank you, team. Another question from Kellery Miles from the Jamaica Observer. The DG has indicated that we are now moving towards a higher growth phase, but why does the projection for fiscal year growth, why is it still confined to a 1 to 2% range?
So that's a good, so we say we're moving into a new growth phase. So what a lot of the momentum we've seen were because of the types of policies and reforms undertaken over the last, you would say, easily 7 years to address some of the structural imbalances, which positioned the country to recover as fast as it did. And I think among, you know, the leading in terms of recoveries and performances globally. And so we are going into a new phase where now you're saying, instead of having recovered, and we've confirmed both in our last release that we recovered from a GDP standpoint to surpassing pre-COVID levels of output, and now we are confirming that we've recovered in terms of labor, surpassing pre-COVID levels of employment. We are saying we are in now a new growth phase, and so the challenge of going forward is how do we look at technology enhancing innovative ways to sustain robust levels of growth going forward. So as we are normalizing, someone a person would argue that we are moving to the long-term trend of growth generally. We're expecting and hoping that with initiatives being undertaken over the last number of years and being promulgated now, we would see higher levels of growth going forward. But what you're seeing in terms of the projection now is just exiting that momentum that you'd have had from a recovery phase, and now looking at, as we would say, removing the scaffolding to have the country on a sustained path of growth, that we look at new areas. And so we are building out, and we see new areas, you're looking at same tourism, but in enhanced ways of offering the tourism product and diversified ways within tourism. Still ongoing efforts to diversify the economy. We are seeing industries such as the BPO outsourcing industry and upskilling in that industry as a new area. We're looking at still in areas of logistics, building out the shipping industry, a number of things we want to see happening there. Greater infusion of technology as a cross-cutting issue across all industries. We are seeing expansion and modernization in some of our existing and traditional industries to ensure that we minimize downtime and have more sustained, robust levels of output taking place. So that's what we are promoting, and with that, I think supported by ongoing training and ensuring more robust educational outcomes and training opportunities in our labor market. So this is a concerted effort across a whole of society effort, and that's what we are hoping to promulgate going forward.
Thank you so much, DG. Another question from Leon Francisque, noting as a caveat that monetary policy and interest rates are the purview of the Bank of Jamaica. The question is, what assumptions are made of monetary policy and interest rates, in particular in the growth forecast for 2023-2024 for that fiscal year?
We continue to assume relative stability for the period being looked at for the fiscal year 23-24. So no specific figures to share, but we continue to assume relative stability as we proceed.
So it's fair that, as the Bank of Jamaica has outlined, they are pursuing and have been now an inflation targeting regime, and they have outlined to the country a 4% to 6% target range, and you're seeing their policy initiatives and efforts consistent with that. And so, as James has said, we don't anticipate any surprises. We anticipate that continued pursuit of what they have laid out as would be, their monetary indicators.
Thank you, DG and James. And we have a question from a viewer on YouTube. Has the workforce contracted compared with the pre-COVID period?
No, we have made a point in the statement by the DG that we have fully recovered from the pre-COVID highs. In fact, we are some 39,900 persons above our pre-COVID levels. So it's an all-time high level of employment.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, I invite you to join us for the next press briefing scheduled for mid-November 2023, where an update will be provided on economic performance for July to September 2023. Thank you everyone for joining us and for your engagement in terms of asking questions. Please enjoy the rest of your day.